You are listening to the Marketing Equation Podcast with Martin Shervington.
Hello everybody, welcome to the Marketing Equation. And I'm joined by somebody I had a curry with. In fact, a group of us had curry. His name's Dominic Johnson. Dominic, welcome. Who are you? What do you do? I know what you do.
So I'm the co-founder of Consult Partners, one of the leading PR agencies here in San Francisco and across the United States.
Let's talk about PR then. In the old days, there was almost only PR as a way to get messages out there, apart from advertising. I know that's the most general thing, but it was almost like that was a way. And I don't want to say it was like free, but if you could do it yourself, you could do it free. And then if you use an agency, it's there. And social media's changed a lot with what happens and the internet generally. You've been around this field the whole time, haven't you? You've seen what's grown and developed. Where do you think the state of play is for PR now? What's modern PR?
I think it's basically the same, and I think it's the same since kind of almost Dickensian times. It's storytelling. I mean, it's what's your story and how are you going to tell it and through what channels are you going to tell it, and whether that's, part works that Dickens used to sell on the corner in Whitechapel, or whether that's social media, Tumblr, Medium, the New York Times, it's still about storytelling. And that, for me, is fundamental. And I think that's where a lot of agencies get it wrong. They think it's about selling, about picking the phone up and behaving like timeshare salespeople and bugging the hell out of people. And, that doesn't make logical sense. I mean, I dramatized it in the way that I just portrayed it to you, but it's actually not a million miles away from that. I mean, we have journalists talk to us all the time about how many pitches they get. They don't write pitches, they write stories.
Yeah.
And they don't get many of those. And so if you can tell a story well, if you can tell it in a sensitive way to both client or personality or product needs, whatever the kind of defining goal is, then you can get traction. And as I said, that hasn't changed. It's just the channels through which you tell it have changed, and the diversity of channels and the opportunity you have to tell it in different ways have changed. And that's a good thing.
Great.
And by the way, I don't think PR is ever free. Coming back to your point, because I think at the end of the day, there's always repercussions of the stories you tell. And, as you're seeing with the whole Brexit sort of fiasco, and for us, Donald Trump, I mean, my God, talk about a PR story. I mean, the guy has managed to spend 10% of all of his competitors in a political campaign because PR is funding everything. And, but look at the fallout from that. I mean, look at the implications. And so I think PR may be free as a client, but the repercussions if you do it wrong, or if you go off base, or if you do something that's kind of reckless, there's definitely costs to pay.
Yeah, interesting. Let's go back to story then. What makes a good story?
Heart, emotion. I mean, especially in tech, which is kind of the area that we spend a lot of time in, it's all about bits and bytes and not about hearts and minds. Even if you look at, enterprise software companies, you don't see Oracle mentioned very often without Larry Ellison being followed. I mean, even the most technical, the most business-focused technology stories are still predicated on people.
Yeah.
Microsoft and Bill Gates are forever intertwined, even though he's kind of, very much kind of got a half a foot in, half a foot out. So it's about finding something that actually plays to the hearts and minds of people. And that may be, to the business mind, it may be to the business heart. It doesn't mean you have to kind of break down and cry with every story, but you've got to engage people emotionally as much as you have commercially and intellectually.
What about social media then? What's the role of that?
It breaks it down into smaller chunks. I mean, if anything, you can kind of play with that emotional engagement even more, because, you have the opportunity with video, with longer form content, with content that people add their commentary to really enrich a story and to get people involved in a story and to get people kind of snowballing the story for you. So it's just an extension. I mean, the key bit of social media is media. It's still media. And people kind of think that social media's got its own rules. It does, but it should be treated with the same respect that you treat traditional media. It's just another channel with its own quirks, with its own dynamics, and people drive it.
Well, let's jump to that traditional media then, because we understand a lot about social media and how, and it's exactly as you say, and really connecting the stories with people that care and they can spread them and so on. Traditional media, I was doing some research. it really matters still from a sentiment point of view, and people read papers. I mean, go to the UK, we were talking about the current political stuff. The Daily Mail takes a stance, and the Times takes a stance, and the Guardian takes a stance. When you're constructing things, the relationships you have with the journalists that are working in those traditional media, it's still as it was then. Is that what it?
No, it used to be, journalists had defined beats. I used to work at News Corporation. I used to work very closely with the Times, with the Sun, with the News of the World. And, journalists would have 2 or 3 stories to write a day. Maybe if they were an investigative reporter, they'd have 1 a month. Now, that's all changed. I mean, you don't have a defined beat. Journalists are kind of all over the place. They're covering things, not only because subjects kind of bleed into each other, but just because the pressure for productivity. A blogger can crack out a story every 20 minutes, and they have to respond to that velocity. So, they're far more frequent. They're far less defined in terms of subject area. And they have to be slightly more opinionated because there's a lot of opinion out there. So I think actually one of the interesting things about newspapers, I mean, if you look at the op-ed section and the opinion sections, I mean, I don't know, but I don't think they used to be the best read parts of the newspapers in the 60s, 70s, 80s. It was still the news and the sport that were driving it. Yeah. I think that opinion's becoming more interesting to people now. Especially if it's considered opinion. I mean, if you look at YouTube and look at the rise of YouTubers, and you're now seeing a number of YouTube stars actually becoming genuine television stars, being offered TV contracts, being offered film contracts, music contracts.
We're seeing this crossover.
Yeah, and it's because they have a point of view, they have a voice, whether it's a kind of a singing voice or an entertainment voice or a comedy voice. I mean, I know you have a background in comedy. I mean, it's
not that funny lately. I've got
yeah, but it's just giving the opportunity for that kind of original point of view to rise to the top a lot quicker.
Yeah. And it's faster, isn't it? As you said, it's got the volume. But let's then look then to give people some tips on this journalist approach. Can you do the PR on your own, do you think? And obviously you have an agency and it's bigger clients and so on. But do you think so? But let me tell you, back in the day, Daily Mail. When I was starting off and I was doing loads of stuff, I was doing books and exercise programs and all of this stuff. This is my hippie days. It's like almost 20 years ago. And I
can't imagine you with long hair and tie-dyes.
No, I had that. Yeah, well, no, I did. When I lived in Australia, after university, I lived in Australia for 2 years. I probably told you this. And then I went to Costa Rica traveling for 7 months. So that was a real hippie time, getting into yoga and whatever. Right. So approach the journalist. I had a product to sell. Approached the journalist in Daily Mail, and basically, and it was Susie Greaves it was back then, you made friends. You just became friends with them. And that's almost like how social media is now, is that you become part of a network. And the funny thing is, once you get that, then suddenly the doors of the Daily Mail were open, because she had to write a piece, I'd help her write a piece, the piece was around stuff like, and that would then get out. And I'd be like, wow, I've just got an article in the Daily Mail, effectively. That's kind of crazy. Is it still like that? I haven't done this for a long time.
It is and it isn't. I mean, relationships are still critical. You've got to look. I mean, whether it's a PR person or an entrepreneur or whatever, you've still got to look someone in the eye and say, "Do I believe this person?"
Yeah.
Whether you do that, physically, or whether you do it virtually, and you kind of, or through recommendation. I mean, that's a big part of it. Especially if a journalist is going to invest in a story. I mean, if they pick up, let's say, coverage of a company for the first time, or if they write about your movie, they're kind of putting their worth out there by backing it, by ripping it down, by building it up. And so, there needs to be an aspect of trust with them. The problem is that, I mean, as I said, I used to work in the media business. You'd go for 4-hour lunches in the pub in Wapping, and you'd forge friendships. Oh, I love you, and all of this. And by the end of it, you hope you got a story, and you hope they remember it. You don't do as much of that anymore. I mean, the face-to-face availability of people, given the volume that they're having to pump out, is a lot less. So we do stuff. We'll just pull together journalists for happy hours. We'll go out to the baseball with them. I mean, it's about forging relationships with people, and you just have to do it in different ways. And if anything, PR's become more valuable to a lot of journalists, in traditional journalists, because, they can only cultivate a certain amount of relationships now, and they will fall back on people who can be the conduit for a volume of stories for them. And not, as I said at the beginning of this, people that just sell,
yeah,
but people understand what they want and know how to craft things for their audience. And so, we're content providers for those guys. Or, not everybody, unfortunately, in my field is. I mean, some people are just kind of haranguers. But if you're good, you are a content source.
So that's interesting. That's another perspective on it. It's not getting the story out. It's serving the journalists with good quality content that helps them build the story around. Because that's the thing. The press release shouldn't be the thing that's published. Shouldn't it?
No, absolutely. And unfortunately, it still is. You get a lot of lazy journalism, a lot of lazy blogging. And journalism's kind of a catch-all. I'm being lazy there. I mean, blogging, journalism, writing, whatever. I mean, it's, people will pump things out on the back of, they can't, hey, I've got to do a story every 20 minutes. Some bloggers are paid by the word. And so, hey, I've got 1,000-word press release here. There's $40 in my pocket. Let's pump that out, and I'll just change the headline. But, readers aren't stupid. I mean, they kind of pick up the fact that the tone of voice changes from article to article. And I don't know about you, but I follow certain writers because I like their style. I feel comfortable in their analysis. I like the cadence of what they do. I mean, Steve Bell on The Guardian, the cartoonist, I go to him first almost every day to kind of get a sense of what he thinks is going on. And in his case, it's exaggerated. But I trust his view, and I like the way that he represents it. And there are certain journalists that are really good at just kind of unpicking things. I mean, I have a less patience for TV journalism. I think that's a really a more difficult medium where the pressure of 24 News is just to keep pumping out stuff that is becoming even more sensational. I mean, Fox is the master at that, but CNN, quite frankly, is not a million miles away. And I was at the Boston bombing. Unfortunately, my wife was running the marathon. Fortunately, she was fine. But I was stuck in the hotel room right by the finish, having seen what had happened, desperate for information. I didn't know where she was. And I saw the most scandalously alarming, inaccurate crap come out that channel for 45 minutes. Because they had to fill the space. They knew something had happened. They didn't have the facts, but they had an audience. And for them, big events like that, it's money, it's advertising revenue, and it sounds terrible. But all of a sudden, they get their big ratings. And so they'll bring on experts for gun control, or in this case, they had an expert from the gas board because they were telling everybody for half an hour it was a gas leak. So... that's the kind of, for me, the least savory end of the media spectrum is the pressure to invent news just to fill airtime, to sell advertising. I still, kind of move back into, longer form journalism. And I think you're starting to see the rise of longer form journalism again. Or even, I think one of the great things about Twitter, coming back to your comments about social media, you've got to be a really good writer to convey something in 140 characters. A lot of people aren't. There's just a lot of dross that goes past, but that's a really tough discipline. And if you can kind of, some comedians are fabulous at doing that. I mean, Ricky Gervais, some of his one-liners are amazing. Have you ever seen, I think he's kind of gone dormant now, but there was a guy called Modern Seinfeld on Twitter?
No.
Oh, check it out. I think it's Mod Seinfeld is his Twitter handle. And he basically wrote in 140 characters for 3 years or so, daily ongoing episodes of Seinfeld just on Twitter. And they were brilliant, absolutely fabulous. And that's a skill.
Yeah. Interesting. All right, so as we move into the last section, I know you're a busy man. What makes it? How do you measure success for a PR campaign for one of your clients?
It depends upon what the commercial objectives are. We always work back. So, we are launching tomorrow. I don't think I have a colleague next to me who's going to clout me, but we're launching a speaker, a wireless outdoor speaker, which is the first of its type. Now, in that case, they have very defined goals for driving people to the site to sell. So they'll measure it in units shipped and the profile of the articles in certain publications to help drive penetration into retail. In other cases, we work with Sprint, for instance. We work with PwC. It's more about thought leadership for those guys, and kind of, we took Sprint into the health and fitness space. They were the first real mobile carrier over here to be active in wearables and fitness tracking and all that. We bought runners and we had events in store. So that was about kind of thought leadership, which turned into activations. At the end of the day, we have to work back from what they want. We can't set objectives of our own. We'll be asked for, how many articles can you get, what sort of reach can you get, and you'd be amazed. Talking about the Daily Mail, a lot of people say, hey, I want to be in the Daily Mail. It is the biggest news site in the States. I don't know if you're aware of that. It's bigger.
I know, it's huge. I don't know if it's the biggest, but yeah.
It is the biggest news site in the States by eyeballs, and I don't think that's a good thing.
Probably not, but it's the Daily Mail. For those that don't know what the Daily Mail is, I don't know if there is an equivalent.
For those that don't know what the Daily Mail is, I take my hat off to you. Yeah, please do not try and find out what it is.
Clear of that one for as long as you can. But it's interesting. It's about perspectives, and that perspective generally is not always a complete rounded perspective. Let's say moving on from the Daily Mail. Right, next, last bit. You mentioned there something which we chat about, which is really interesting. It's not only PR, but you said about the events and about the activation. See, that's another aspect. That's another aspect you're doing. So there's a rounded view of the role of information spread, which is essentially what PR becomes, isn't it? And then there's also the real world brand building, community building, I guess, aspect too. Is that accurate?
Yeah, very much so. But coming back to kind of like the story. If you think about how you tell a story, you buy a book, you tell it around the campfire, you read it on your Kindle. It's just different ways of dramatizing something. And so, for Sprint, for instance, we could put out a press release that talks about the new products they're stocking, about a promotion that they're running, or we could bring, in this case, a guy called Dean Karnazes, who is this world-famous marathon runner who's run the furthest, the fastest. He's now running, I think, this year, a marathon in every country in the year. It's sort of crazy stuff. We bring him into store to give tips to kids. We take them on a fun run. So we're just basically telling the story in a different way. We're advertising it. And so it's no different for us. It's just how you bring things to life. One of my sort of favorite ideas, which unfortunately we've never done, which was for an unnamed client, is we wanted to showcase the power of a network. And we came up with an idea of, you talk about a network, it's this kind of this intangible nothing. And, speed when it comes to a network is... it's always your web download. You can't tell. It could be computers crappy. You could have a virus. So we wanted to create a live concert where we had half the band on the East Coast, half the band on the West Coast, and then simulcast it live on people's phones. So you actually split the audio in half. Yeah. Now that will show you the speed. And I would love to do that to this day. I think it's a brilliant idea. Unfortunately, logistically, we just couldn't pull it together in time for a big event. But I think that sort of thing is, that's about really dramatizing a story in a very kind of interesting way.
Awesome. Where can everybody find you?
Consortpartners.com, CONSORT partners.com.
Fantastic. You on Twitter? Elsewhere?
I'm on Twitter, I'm just at Dominic_Johnson. And unfortunately, you will see a lot of ranting about Arsenal and about Bulldogs, but hey.
Keep the Bulldogs. Football's right. Leave the football. Yeah. Good stuff. Well, thank you so much. Stay on the line just for a second. I'm just going to click the end of the pause. And thanks everybody for listening. I'll see you or hear you, or you'll hear me next time on the Marketing Equation.
Thank you for listening to the Marketing Equation podcast, brought to you by PlusYourBusiness.com and Effective.fm.